Great to see all of you guys. I just welcome you. Like I said, this is the EMCC. It's the denomination EMCC, and this is our connected platform. I know a lot of people are here today supporting Sam that might not be part of the EMCC. I want to warmly welcome you. I hope you feel among family today, and we are just so thankful that you're able to be here with us. Without further ado, I want to just do a quick introduction of Sam Barry. He is going to be talking to us today about why we can't go it alone. He has been going to Tyndale, and he has been doing doctorate studies. He's from Stouffville, Ontario. He's been a pastor with EMCC for about 15 years, and we're going to learn about a mentorship model that he's been studying and diving into. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him today. It's really exciting because as the EMCC, we have something called the Way of Jesus. And one of those markers is I am helping someone and someone is helping me become a growing follower of Jesus. And so that is what we are going to be talking about today, helping each other become growing followers of Jesus. So Sam, take it away. Look forward to hearing from you.
I appreciate it. Once again, thank you all for taking some time out of a Friday. Once again, we've got people from Europe through the West Coast. So we are gathered at all ends of the clock. And yeah, I'm excited to be with you, to have the opportunity to share with you a little bit of my journey. So I'm going to get a presentation up here for you. Perfect. All right, thumbs up if you can see the presentation there, and we are going to get started. As soon as I click back to the right window, here we go. All right, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you. Once again, my name is Sam Barry. I am a pastor in the EMCC. I have been kicking around since 2006 in Ontario. I served at Markham Missionary from 2006 to 2020. And just fresh this year, I have started at EastRidge EMC, helping as an associate pastor. My roles over the last number of years have always been centered on leadership development. The concept of helping people discover who God made them to be, the gifts that they have, and helping release them into the right context to use those to their full capacity. I've had the opportunity to work with leaders at all levels of the church, from board members to children's ministry workers to ushers, greeters, worship team members, small group leaders. I've been married to my wife, Ashley, since 2007. We've got 3 kids. Logan, who's 8, Marley 5, and Hadley, who is 1. Logan is maybe only about 12 inches shorter than I am, so I've got my work cut out for me pretty quick. Over the last number of years, I have been always interested in the concept of continuing education and the concept of being challenged personally. And I decided to explore a doctoral program at Tyndale. Now, the program at Tyndale is focused on this concept of looking at a question or a problem or a dynamic and working at trying to actually engage it and move that forward, or even potentially solve a problem. The degree is structured in a way that allows you to really tackle your ministry context and turn it into academic work. Now, over the last number of years I've been in this program, the church ministry that I was in a little bit of a transitional flux. And it got me resourced with the denomination and some other leaders to try to figure out what would be a question or a dynamic that I could tackle that would allow me to focus on as a research project. Now, at that point, we're thinking back into 2018 I had just come back from a conference out in Manitoba from a church called Southland and a program called Church Renewal, their introductory weekend. So having the opportunity to chat with those pastors, came up with the concept of trying to explore and see what it was about that experience that has been so formative. And so I came to this concept of a research question, of a very narrowed, specific dialogued structure of what I want to discover, which is to explore the experiences of EMC pastors, as there have been many, in the Southland mentoring program to discover the programmatic values, transferable mentorship principles, and impactful structures. What I wanted to do is have the opportunity to explore what this journey that some EMC pastors have been on, how it has shaped them, and what that can teach us about our next stage in terms of ministry and development and our approach to learning and developing pastors in the EMC. And so I did this project very much focused on this Southland model of pastoral development. Now, Southland is a church in Steinbach, Manitoba, about 45 minutes outside Winnipeg, that has had an amazing experience over the last number of years. Pre-COVID, they had a weekly attendance of 3,000 people in a town of only 15,000. When I was there, it was funny chatting with people. Oh, what brought you to our town? Well, I came for work. What work would bring you to Steinbach? Oh, I'm here for the church renewal weekend. Oh, at Southland. Yeah, my brother goes to that church. No, I go to that church. This church had had such an impact within the community that pretty much everybody had only about 1 degree of separation from somebody who was involved in this ministry. And over the course of their years and the journeys that they had, they tried to understand what had led them to the growth and explosion of development that they had. And they had centered it down to the work of the Holy Spirit. And through that, they distilled those practices into a number of different structures to help them really explain the journey that they had been on and explain the work that God had done in them. So in 2018, I had the opportunity to go to their church renewal weekend. Now, the weekend is an opportunity to get a taste of who they are, of how they function, and the journey that they have been on as a church. The weekend included a main focus on 3 specific workshops. The first was called a set-free experience. It was a process of discernment and prayer and discovery in trying to figure out what it is that are the aspects that are holding people back in their life. What is it the sin and struggles that they're dealing with? And they took us through a process that was very exhaustive and very intentional to try to help identify all of these known and unknown factors that are draining and that are holding us back from the full potential of who we can be in Jesus. And then this program, through direct and very strong transparency and vulnerability, allowed the opportunity to pray through these things and cast off these shackles of sin and struggle that leaders were going through, and allow them to stand on solid ground enough to be rebuilt in who God designed them to be. The second workshop that we experienced was one called Hearing God, which was a journey all about practices of discernment and listening and praying. How do we understand what God is saying with us? And especially as so many of us are different styles of learners, different perspectives on how we understand the world around us and how God is infinite in how he shares with us. It was a process of learning and teaching skills and practical structures to give individuals the opportunity to hear from God in different ways. And the third aspect that we experienced over the course of the weekend was something called a prayer summit, which was a corporate gathering and celebration of prayer. And we had the opportunity to actually witness some of these skills and abilities in practice. Over the course of the weekend, they had the opportunity for all of those visiting the conference for the weekend to be prayed for by a number of people. And as it was my turn to be prayed for, they had us split up in the room, and there was about 3,500 people in the room at that time. And they said, if you really want to get some truth in your life, go hang out with the high school kids. And I thought, as a former youth pastor myself, well, there's deep wisdom in that corner of the room. Let's go check it out. And through the prayers that I received and the words that were spoken into my life, they saw things in my life and identified things in me that I needed to be aware of, and stuff that affirmed for me the experience I had that I never would have gotten to on my own. And I thought to myself, if these high school kids are being developed in such an amazing way to be able to speak wisdom and speak truth into total strangers' lives, there's such an amazing thing that's taking place here. Now, once the weekend of the church renewal introduction is complete, lead pastors are invited into the opportunity to join a mentoring group. Now, many of the EMCC pastors have joined, have attended the weekend, and a number of them have joined these long-term mentorship relationships. And through that, we've had the opportunity to have some informal conversations along the way with our EMCC leaders. But to that point, there hadn't been any formal research done. And as I've learned through this journey, formal research is much different than informal conversations onto what it was that these pastors experienced and how it actually shaped them. So once I had this concept in my mind of what I wanted to explore, the question became, how do you do it in an academic way that is structured and oriented to give you data and information that can be depended on, can be documented for the sake of publishment and research, which has been an entirely new side of my brain that I didn't know, and that has been quite forcefully growing in this season. And so I began this whole process with the concept of doing interviews. Now, there's two ways in which I approach these interviews, from an action research perspective and an appreciative inquiry. Action research as a concept is really focused on working together with those who are involved in something to try to contribute towards improving a process or a structure. In which case, for me, this was joining with those who were interviewing and having the opportunity together to collaboratively discern and work towards potential new ideas or structures or concepts for mentorship practices in other contexts. I use an appreciative inquiry approach as I wanted to really engage those individuals who'd been in this journey to help discover what those best practices, experiences, and those valued elements had been. And for that, recognizing that for each of the individuals that participated within my research, their experiences would have been fairly unique in terms of where they were at personally when they came into this journey, and as well as what aspects of the program they truly engaged with. So I performed these interviews, and the interview structure followed 3 different segments of questions: some basic demographic info, some questions in terms of the experience of the church renewal process, what led them to the event, when did they attend, how was the mentorship structure formed, who were the mentors in the program, what were the values and challenges of that, and what would you do differently. And then thirdly, we focused on this concept of EMCC ministry, of recognizing that you've gone through an experience, you have seen some positives, some challenges. Now, what of that information in your experience could continue to shape how EMCC practices are moving forward? Now, in that third section there, the feedback that we received was very interesting, and we're going to chat a little bit about that later on. Now, once I'd completed my interviews, I was left with 40-something pages of notes, another 7 hours of audio recordings, some videos, some follow-up emails for clarification. And the question becomes, when you have that volume of data, how do you actually organize it and categorize it in a way that actually prepares a final summary of it that is actually really dependent and rooted within the information and raw data itself? So I went through a 2-part process of coding and analyzing. The first, which shaped a lot of the questions that you saw in the last slide, was how am I going to ask questions that will actually get to the core of what information I want to seek? This had to do with using questions that would ask for specific knowledge or experience pieces, questions that would imply about personal feelings and personal experiences, as well as looking at a way to structure those questions that the answers would actually help to link back to that original research question. I looked at a number of different authors in terms of Stringer, Bell, and Branson to help really core down my approach to these interviews in a way that would actually help me move towards a greater outcome in terms of having the information that I was looking for. And the second part of that aspect of coding that data and preparing for that was the actual means of interpretation. Now, for the means of interpretation, this had to do with how I coded and colored the data, looking for thematic elements, epiphanic experiences, critical incidents, opinions, reflections, things that were practical, measurable outcomes that the participants shared, and coming up with a coding structure and coloring structure for my notes in a way to make sure that I have the opportunity to draw lines through the different content between the different interviewees to make sure that we are seeing those same themes as they arise up within each of the participants, and if they arise. As there were a number of occasions where one participant would say, this is something that was highly impactful for me and was not shared by any of the other participants. So as I prepared to write this final report in this process, I needed to find these elements that would gravitate towards building what these outcomes were. What the outcomes of my research were needed to really reflect the content that was given to me through these interviews and not just what I thought from the outside, which required me to, as Branson says, listen for the most promising, generative, synergistic themes in the data. And this allowed me to work a system of categorization that would help me within the next stage of this project, and followed a similar structure of looking for relationship, family dynamic elements, information sharing while taking care of care for confidentiality and all of that aspect, so that the final product of what I would discover would once again link back to not only an ethical process of research, but also that original question that I wanted to get to of what are those valuable concepts, principles, and dynamics. Now, what did I discover? We'll get to a couple of those things, but two notes I'd like to make right now. Number one, researching a program that people have invested multiple years into generally means that they will have positive things to say about it. And in that sense, there was a very overwhelming amount of appreciation and value for the Southland mentoring model and the experiences that they had. These experiences came out, and these reflections of these values came out in two ways. The first was emotional and spiritual, and the second was structural and organizational. Now, as I went through all the material, I realized very quickly that the emotional and spiritual reflections were so personal to each of the candidates that participated that they reflected the program, but there weren't that many parallels between each person's experience, because we're all different people. We're all going through different things in life, and we're all just, once again, at these different stages of growth and development. The other aspect was this programmatic structural angle, which, as we explored that, and we're going to get into that a little later on, those were where all of the consistent pieces of feedback and value identification were. Now, one thing to note is that within all of the applicants who participated within this, or participants who participated within it, there was an overwhelming appreciative feedback for our regional ministers. Now, we're looking at the Ontario end of things, but there was an acknowledgement that the RMs have made a significant investment within the development of pastors and within pastors growing and being shaped within their spiritual and personal journeys. But those engagements more were on a personal level than a functional position. Our RMs, all of them across Canada, have a number of different things that they are responsible for, aspects that they are in the process of managing. I mean, each one of them has dozens upon dozens of churches, and some with multiple staff members under their belt, in which case these engagements for the RM were more functional out of their own personality and their own care for leaders than it was necessarily a function of their role. Not a bad thing, but just a very clear one that was raised a number of times, of just a deep appreciation for the RMs. Now, one of the questions that did come up from the participants that I found very interesting was, how does the denomination, the EMCC, see its role in regards to pastoral development? And there's your product placement right there for the day. Yeah, that question of what does the denomination consider itself and its role in terms of developing pastors? Does it see itself as primarily responsible for that? Does it see itself as being the one required to create all of the content for pastoral development? I'm not going to answer this question. We're going to come back to it in a little bit. The third stage of my research was this concept of an expert panel. The goal of the expert panel was to perform collaborative analysis on the findings and summarized documents of my research. So I've done my interviews, I've taken my information, compressed it down, drawn a lot of the parallels and identification, and now sitting down with this expert panel, the question became, what does this all mean and what application does this have within the practices of leadership development? I shared with them what led these pastors to join this mentorship model, what the format and structure was, what those spiritual and personal impacts were, what aspects of the structural program were helpful in terms of development, the challenges with the model, and the feedback on EMC pastoral events. Now, the feedback in terms of the events ended up coming from the perspective of recognizing that our RMs, national team, are up to their eyeballs in different things. There isn't a whole lot of capacity to add a whole new branch of structure and ministry. So recognizing within the pathways that we have, within the functions that we have, how could we work better to accomplish pastoral development within these events? Now, one of the interesting things about research is sometimes you come across something very interesting, but it doesn't link back to the question you asked in the first place. And therefore, no matter how entertaining it is or how potentially interesting it is, you got to put it aside for another day. And thus, the outcomes from that panel, what we ended up focusing on were those programmatic structural aspects of the Southland mentoring model that have been a high factor within the impact on these pastors. Now, mentorship has been around longer than I have and longer than many of us have. And it's from a perspective could be said that pretty much many things, if not everything, has been found or attempted in one way, shape, or form or another. And in that sense, the three things that I'm going to be sharing are not necessarily by any means new, but what they are or what they have been is highly impactful in connection to one another. And it's the marriage of these three things together that I think speaks to that really practical, transferable mentorship model. It's kind of like you see online all the time, those different recipes where it's like 3-ingredient recipes. One of our favorites in our household is chicken bacon ranch. You take a piece of chicken breast, you soak it in ranch sauce, wrap it in bacon, throw it in the oven. I mean, none of those things are particularly new, but if you're looking for a quick fix meal for the evening, it's something worth trying and something that is unique in its composition. So once again, hit the grocery store on your way home today. In which case, I'm going to take you through these three aspects and these three components of the Southland mentoring model that in combination for one another formed the setting and environment that these pastors felt, shaped, and developed through. And the first is under the concept of accountability, of having a designated leader who is overseeing a development plan, of having a recurring meeting model that is regular, but also very clearly outlined in terms of what is expected coming into that meeting and what is expected coming out of that meeting. For the participants, they had material that they had to complete as a part of their development plan that was required to be done before their weekly meetings, as well as practical pieces to be applied after their weekly meetings. It was this regularity of material and content that required engagement, but had an accountable deadline to it within a setting that allowed them to really invest themselves within this development plan that they had committed to. There's an expectation of contribution that you didn't necessarily have the opportunity to just show up, stick the meeting on in the background and jump in every so often with a quip or a contribution, but it required attention and investment for that space in which it went. And there were clear goals to measure how the progress was taking place through a calendar perspective, a content perspective, and as well as for the meeting itself. The second aspect that was highly impactful was this concept of cohort learning. Once again, not a new concept. Our entire Western education system is built on cohorts. But by grouping leaders together and grouping a cross-section of leaders, as where this program is not specifically denominationally oriented, allowed pastors to join with other pastors from other denominations, other provinces, other countries, who are encountering entirely different systems and structures and dynamics and reporting systems and ministry challenges, allowed these leaders to connect and be shaped and grow and challenge one another as a part of the group, and for these connections to grow outside of those meeting times as well. By having multiple people work through the same content at the same time, it allowed more networking to take place outside of the actual mentoring program. And it was some of those relationships that participants highlighted as being some of the most unique pieces of it, of having, once again, the opportunity to journey through content with other people who are also going through that content, but maybe facing it in a very different place, system, structure, or approaching it from a different strategy. The third piece that we discovered in the data was this concept of structure, of having a goal-oriented process with clear meetings, seasonal commitments, and boundaries that were very well outlined. So the Southland model was a mentorship experience that ran for 3 years, starting in September, ending in May, weekly meetings with a break for Christmas, for 1 hour on whatever day that was set for that specific cohort. Having these clear structures and boundaries allowed a much easier sense of commitment to it, because it was going in eyes open, but also having a seasonal approach to it, knowing that there is a commitment from A to B, and then there will be a break and some change to the rhythm, and then coming back into it in another season. Most churches follow a structure of seasonal ministry, and thus following the academic school year seemed to fit best for that structure. But recognizing that that structure could be unique in any circumstance or any different ministry scenario, based and defined by what that goal was for that time together. Now, often research will lead you right to the edge and kick you off a cliff, and you'll land somewhere that you didn't expect. And thus, for me, coming into this, thinking of having a specific context in mind with a specific structure to apply into it, where this process landed me at is instead a set of values and a set of principles that are a little more loose in shape, but may actually have the capacity to be placed into a number of different contexts and a number of different ways. Now, earlier on, we talked about a question that was raised through the participants in the research of how does the denomination see its role in terms of pastoral development? And through the expert panel, we actually had the opportunity to dialogue and walk that through a little bit. And the answer, as defined by those who participated, was the denomination sees itself as a resourcing agency, as an entity that exists that is not going to necessarily seek to create all its own material to accomplish every single task and opportunity, but one that can advocate for proven systems, proven structures, valued content and experiences, and be an agency that can help connect individuals to the specific opportunities to be developed in the specific ways in which they may be blessed best from that. And frankly, I think that is probably the wisest choice to take as a disposition, as a denomination. There's a challenge in being second to market, as one of the participants said. When there is a fantastic product that exists out there, does it make more sense to buy into that product or create your own with less resourcing, less resources, less quality behind it, or maybe even just a different set of experiences coming into that? The expert panel, we had this opportunity to talk about how the denomination can be in a position with the reach that it does to help continue to point individuals to the right opportunities for what their needs are. And it was interesting in that discussion, having been the MC for 15 years, I learned new things in terms of aspects of the EMCC website that has resources and the different programs that have been made over the years that, as pastors, not all of us may be aware of. Now, continuing on from there, another question that the expert panel came to within the course of this discussion was this question about what is the threshold for leaders to join in a mentoring program when it comes to workload and commitment. They asked me in this process, do you know what the time length is, or what the number of hours are, and what those specific barriers are that hold people back from jumping into a longer term structured development plan? And although I desperately wanted to jump at my suspicions at what I thought that answer would be, research would tell me to keep my mouth shut and save that question for another day. But we're going to come back to this one in a little bit as well. So the question comes in terms of, why is this mentorship process something that we should be taking so seriously as leaders within the church? I know we see examples of it all throughout Scripture. We see examples of Paul and Timothy, who we're going to touch on in a minute. We see examples of Jethro and Moses, of Elisha and Elijah. We see it within Jesus and his disciples. And to a degree, I think we as leaders within the church, we see mentorship as a valuable commodity for development, but I don't necessarily think sometimes we grasp the full depth of its impact. One of the verses that one of the participants raised within our discussions after the interview was 2 Timothy 2:2. And the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. This is the concept of mentorship, of passing along our experiences, our insights, of recognizing them as valuable commodities that are worth sharing, and to share them with the anticipation that those who receive them will then pass them on to the next person and the next person. And thus, in this verse, we get this 4-generational exchange of this mentorship experience, where Paul gives to Timothy the experiences, and Timothy takes what he has heard from Paul and passes it on to those who are reliable, who will also be qualified to teach others. This can definitely happen in a beautiful and organic way within the church, and many times it does. But I would propose the question, or the concept, or the idea that we need to be far more intentional than just hoping for organic things to develop within our staff structures, within our ministry leaders, within the individuals that we are responsible for in terms of helping guide and shape to become more like Jesus. And this question becomes, how are we seeking to intentionally build structures to shape individuals within our local church? We know our denomination will continue to advocate for pastors to be creative and to resource them along the way to do it. And as leaders in churches, we have a number of inherited structures, things like small groups, household meetings, leadership teams that are naturally in place that serve sometimes different roles, either spiritual or structural or facility management. but it becomes the question of how are we setting and orienting them with a goal in mind to help them grow in that process. And so today, with going through this research, I propose a very simple, basic 3 elemental prospect of membership. This, as I would call it, just a simple model. And that would begin by, as leaders, taking the responsibility to make a call to journey together, to draw out from individual leaders and put them together in spaces and invite them on a journey, to inspire them towards a potential destination, a change, and to take on the role of facilitator in that journey. Now, I know for some of us as pastors, the role of facilitator comes quite easily, quite naturally. Others, it's more challenged. And even within our congregation, there are those who flee in fear and nausea at the concept of being responsible to facilitate. But if we're providing people with an opportunity and inviting them into that and taking the same type of posture that the EMC is taking as a resourcing agency, we are not required to curate all of the content for these opportunities to gather. We are not responsible for writing the material. Small group leaders can be resourced with a curriculum or a program, or we can be making short-term workshop series within our churches on a specific theme of discovering gifts, and find the content to lower that bar of intensity for facilitators and place people who are conversational in nature and make a call on them to step up into a new potential opportunity. We need to gather people together, leaders together, and work and point them towards a goal. The more the merrier, to resource together, to build relationships, and to allow those relationships a little bit of structured environment to be introduced in. And then hopefully maybe we'll even see the organic development of that after the fact. I know in my ministry, I've seen the opportunity where we put groups of people in a room together, and then we find out after the fact, 2 people who didn't really know each other are continuing just to grow in their relationship and friendship together. By gathering individuals who could benefit from a similar opportunity and experience of development, we have an opportunity to see growth happen in a way by being intentional and by gathering people that may not have happened otherwise without these 2 first steps taking place. And the third thing that I believe makes this entire opportunity even more attractive to the participants, and what led the participants in this research project to commit to the mentoring journey that they took, was a clear outline of time, format, structure, and expectation of workload. And this is where this piece becomes so much more malleable, so much more loose in terms of structure. Depending on what that goal is, that structure could take any number of different forms of regularity of meetings, of lengths of meetings. I know we're all probably sick of Zoom at this point, but what I find most interesting is over the last year, the higher numbers I've seen attend prayer meetings in Zoom than necessarily in church beforehand. And I believe, at least in my context, that's because there has been a clear expectation. It starts at 7. We're going to get going by 7:02. We will be done by 8. You don't have to pack up your household and drive and 5 babysitting to get there. You don't lose 20 minutes on the other end getting home. These clear expectations and outlines that have been set and structured because it's a meeting invitation on a digital platform, I think have been echoing this same value that individuals crave for, of just clarity of commitment. And in terms of that as well, I think the invitation even into a small group could be so much more powerful under a seasonal invitation in those initial stages. Would you like to join a small group? Well, that seems like a lifelong commitment that I may never get out of. Well, would you like to join a small group where we're going to study this series over the next 4 weeks? I mean, the bar has just been so much more clarified and the road for it just so much more cleared these three things together, this concept of accountability, of cohorting, and of clear structure, were the elements within the EMC pastors' experiences of the Southland that were measurable in each individual candidate's experience that I believe have this greater application into ministry in general. Now, the EMCC over the last 3 years since I started this project has actually made some steps ahead in this journey, partially due to some clarification of goals that they've had at the national level, but also due to this little thing that we're all sick of hearing about called the global pandemic that forced all of us into this exact structure and setting for most of our church meetings. And the EMC leaders thought, how can we create a system and structure of connection that would be more routine and regular and have the opportunity to connect in this required digital season that we're in? And thus they created what they have been referring to as the huddle model. Now, the huddle model is in their description, a vehicle for pastoral development. It is not the only one. It is not the golden one, but it is one that has come organically and grown and accomplished the goals that they have had over these last few years. This shift began as President Curvin was in his role and led the RMs to consider moving the concept of investing within individuals higher in their responsibility and concern of priorities rather than the structural and organizational things that tend to clamor for our attention most. And I've had the opportunity to be invited into a huddle model, and we are entering into our second year of it. And it's been an interesting experience because I've met individuals who I likely would not have met otherwise or seen more than once or twice a year. It's been the opportunity to resource and collaborate a little bit in terms of just how things are going, what's going on. I could use some help with this. I could use some feedback on that. And it's allowed us the opportunity as well, encourage and support each other within our ministry, within our challenges, and within our personal life in a way that I'm not necessarily sure, at least for me and the individuals that are in my huddle, we necessarily would have found that opportunity to do otherwise. And thus the denomination has probably jumped to that structural outcome that I likely would have ended up getting to a recommendation of. But since, once again, this thing called COVID arrived, forced many more of us to adapt a lot sooner to a different way of doing things than we would otherwise. And thus, at the end of this journey, I find myself having a large number of shifts in my understandings. But I think the piece for me is that really stands out is that this concept of developing leaders and making disciples is a journey that can be so much more impactful by the opportunity to do it together. Now, back in the day in my education, I hated group work because it required us to lean on one another. But I think the more we get into real life circumstances, the more that we engage the leaders that we are leading alongside, above, below, those that we are facilitating with, we have this opportunity to be shaped and shape others with nothing more than what God has already shown us, the things that we are already aware of. God, although sometimes is not historical for throwing us in situations where we need to teach something that we didn't already have an understanding of. I believe very much within this that Southland, in their model of ministry, has created a system and structure that has allowed them to curate content towards their experiences and sharing the impact of what the Holy Spirit has done within their community. But they have modeled it in such a way that allows us to shift the destination and the journey there while keeping a similar structure and applying it into any level of church ministry. Although my goal in this process and journey was to assess and recommend practical programmatic elements, I think what I've discovered instead is a very simple recipe and a very simple combination of practices and principles that allow us to land on a series of non-contextual components that allow us the opportunity to develop groups of followers of Jesus together and at the same time. Although this journey has been frustrating and discouraging at some point that it didn't land at what I necessarily anticipated or hoped for, I think that's the exact process that the Lord leads each and every one of us in our own development. To lead us in not the way that we expected, but the way that we needed, and to lead us not towards what we thought we'd get to, but something that may be even potentially more helpful for the journey that we have. So I'd like to take a moment now and ask if there are any questions. Before we are going to jump into breakout rooms, I'd like to ask if anyone has any questions about my research, about the processes, about the journey that I've been on, anything I can clarify, and then we will take it from there.
Yeah, Sam, you got some, hoping you can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah, you got some great stuff in there. And I was just wondering, because I think some of the difficulty with discipleship is the fact that we're more interested in qualitative measurements than quantitative. Like, how do you know that you are more loving than you were last year? Like, how do you measure that? So my question is, like, in your research or in the model you were looking at, how did people measure their spiritual growth? Like, how was that, other than like finishing a study or kind of a sort of linear approach, was there other ways to measure growth?
That is a fantastic question. And I think one of the important things to recognize within that is how we measure growth is going to be fairly individual, and what works for us isn't necessarily going to work for every single person. We actually had this conversation in my huddle earlier last week, and one of the pieces that was raised was a concept of reflective analysis, of looking back personally and trying to measure or observe the changes within your own personal reaction and engagement with something over the course of a journey. So for example, this concept of, I don't know, of patience, of thinking back to a conversation that you had 3 years ago that followed a certain rhythm and dynamic that frustrated you to no end and really unhinged you in terms of just stress. And then recognizing over the course of moving through some material content of being developed in that area, can you think of a more recent opportunity that you faced a similar experience? And was there a marketed change within how you engaged within that? And this is where I think this almost collaborative analysis within the cohort could be an impact into that, of within the people that we're journeying with, within the things that we are working on. How are we engaging on that and using the people around us as sounding boards in that process, and trying to, once again, reflect on experiences, consider changes within that, and then seek from input from those who can speak appropriately into that area and speak to either, once again, affirm or give an alternate perspective on that. So long and short of it, I don't think there's a golden bullet for that, but I do believe that there are practices that can take place by intentionally journeying together and being reflective within those opportunities to display these traits that we're hoping to have learned at some point in this journey. I am going to put 3 questions within the chat that I would love you guys to have the opportunity to discuss. Now, with that, recognizing in the breakout rooms that not everyone's going to know everyone, because most of you know me and I don't know all of you, we'd invite you guys just to take a minute or two just to go around, say who you are, where you're from, and just the opportunity to introduce yourself a little bit as a leader. We are going to take about 12 to 14 minutes in that window for that. So we'd invite everyone to Recognize that we're not going to have the opportunity to solve the world or write a book in these breakout rooms, but just to take a couple minutes. Not everyone has to share on every question. And recognize that if you are more interested in just observing, it's okay in the breakout room to just keep your camera off, to mute yourself and watch the discussion from there. In which case we are going to split you guys into those rooms in just a few minutes. And then we'll look forward to bringing you guys back in about 12 minutes from there. Each room will have a facilitator. You guys know who you are, who can just help in the process of leading that discussion. In which case, we will see you guys back in just a little bit. Yeah, before I pass it off to Chris, I just want to once again say thank you to everyone for taking the time today, and really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you all for joining in on this call. I hope that you can go away just thinking a little bit more about what this might look like in your context. What would it mean to lean into a cohort model and be gathering people together and investing in them and having that kind of life on life transference, that's the wrong word, but how do we walk better together and more intentionally and ask each other good questions and have that turn into some accountability and encouraging one another to follow Jesus in our context? What would that look like? So I just pray, Jesus, that you would help each one of us on this call to know what you're asking us to do out of this. What is that practical step that you are nudging our hearts towards? And Jesus, give us the courage and the intentionality to actually step out into that and invest in other people's lives. So from 2 Corinthians 13:11, finally, brothers and sisters, rejoice. Strive for full restoration, encourage one another, be of one mind and live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be with you. Just a couple of quick notes before we all disappear here. If you want to get a hold of Sam and ask him any questions as you're kind of thinking through what this looks like in your context, maybe there's some practicalities you want to reach out to him for, he is at sam@eastridge.ca. So you can reach out to him there. And if you're looking for more discipleship tools or people who are facilitators in this area that can help you just think through discipleship and some discipleship resources like books and links and stuff like that, EMCC Enrich, ENRICH.ca has a whole bunch of discipleship resources that you guys can reach out and tap into. So emccenrich.ca. Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you everyone for being here today. It's Friday or Friday, so enjoy an awesome weekend wherever you are. Take care, everyone. Thanks for being here.